Welcome back, and thank you for tuning in to HK Cheating Stories. We appreciate each and every one of you joining us. Where in the world are you watching from? Let us know in the comments. Now, let's get the story started. My name is Alex Carter, and my wife once thought it'd be funny to leave me stranded at a gas station in the middle of Colorado. No wallet, no phone, no explanation, just me and the sunburned highway stretching into nowhere. But what she didn't realize was that moment didn't break me. It woke me up. You want to know what happens when a man has nothing left to lose and chooses to rebuild his life from the ground up? Then sit back, because this story, it starts right there, in the dust, where they left me. The Colorado sun was merciless. It beat down on my back like a punishment I didn't deserve. I squinted, wiping the sweat from my forehead with the back of my hand as I stood alone, staring at the empty parking spot where our car had been just 10 minutes ago. The tires were gone. The engine noise had long faded. And with it, my wife Rachel and her three closest friends, Megan, Brooke, and Ivy. At first, I laughed. I actually laughed. They're messing with me, I muttered to myself, pacing in the gravel lot beside the single rusting gas pump. Just another one of their stupid games. They were always pulling something, Rachel and her pack. Little jokes at my expense. Like the time they tricked me into thinking we were going on a couple's retreat, only for it to turn into a girls-only spa weekend, while I ended up dog-sitting Ivy's neurotic poodle. Or when they rigged my phone to blast a fart sound every time I got a text during my job interview. Hilarious, right? 5 years of marriage, and I'd become their court jester. Rachel never stopped them. If anything, she encouraged them. Every time I tried to voice how humiliated I felt, she'd brush it off with a smirk and a lighten up, Alex. You're too sensitive. But this wasn't some harmless prank. This was something else. My phone, still plugged into the car charger. My wallet, tucked in the glove box. They took off without leaving me anything. Not even a bottle of water. All I had were my sweat-drenched clothes and a growing pit in my stomach. We'd been on a road trip for 3 days. Destination, Megan's lake house. Supposedly, a bonding trip for me to finally connect with the girls. Rachel had begged me to come, even promised that this would be different. They like you, babe. They just have a weird sense of humor. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe she cared about how isolated I always felt around them. But from the moment we hit the road, it had been a living hell. They cracked inside jokes I wasn't part of. Megan accidentally spilled coffee on my lap. Brooke kept whispering to Rachel, who'd giggle and give me those side eyes. And Ivy, quiet, but always smirking like she was waiting for me to break. I didn't say a word. I just endured. That's what I always did. The gas station itself was a ghost town, a lonely blip off a back highway, with a flickering neon sign and a restroom that smelled like a crime scene. I'd gone inside to relieve myself, figuring they'd wait. They always waited. Except this time, they didn't. I stepped out, and the car was gone. Just gone. I waited. 5 minutes. 10. 30. The heat grew thick, my throat parched, my shirt clinging to my skin. I scanned the horizon, praying to see their car swinging back around. Rachel hanging out the window shouting, "Gotcha." But the road stayed empty. An hour passed. Then 2. The sun moved across the sky like it had nothing better to do. I sat on the curb, head in my hands, every moment from the past 3 days replaying in my head like a sick montage. The mockery, the subtle digs, Rachel's growing coldness, the way she laughed more with them than she ever did with me. That's when it hit me. They weren't coming back. This wasn't a prank. This was a message. I was dead weight to them. A burden. The guy they tolerated for Rachel's sake, even though deep down, she didn't mind when they treated me like trash. Maybe she even liked it. I wanted to scream. I wanted to cry. But I just sat there, numb. Then a truck rumbled in from the highway, dust kicking up behind it. An old red pickup, its hood humming like a beast too stubborn to die. It pulled up beside me, and the window rolled down. The driver was a big guy with a gray beard, sun-worn skin, and a ball cap stained with sweat and oil. He looked me over with eyes that had seen too much. "You okay, buddy?" he asked, voice low and gravelly. "You've been sitting here a while." I swallowed the lump in my throat. My ride left me. His brow furrowed. He didn't ask questions, just nodded, like this wasn't the first time he'd picked up someone discarded on the side of the road. "Where you headed?" That was the question, wasn't it? I didn't know where home was anymore. Not if Rachel was there. I climbed into his truck without answering. As the gas station disappeared in the side mirror, something inside me cracked, but it wasn't pain. It was clarity. Rachel didn't leave me. She freed me. The silence in Tom's truck was heavy, but not uncomfortable. The old pickup groaned over every bump in the road, its engine humming beneath our feet like some ancient beast just barely hanging on. I sat stiffly in the passenger seat, trying to ignore the stench of diesel, sweat, and fast food wrappers. But more than that, I was trying to keep from unraveling. I stared out the window as the Colorado wilderness blurred past. Dusty plains, sparse trees, the occasional gas station or roadhouse that looked more haunted than operational. I had no idea where we were heading, and I didn't ask. The truth was, I didn't care. Anywhere but back. Tom didn't speak much, just drove, humming along with an old country song crackling from the radio. At one point, he glanced at me sideways and said, "You look like a man who just got run over by life." I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. My wife left me, I muttered. Her and her friends just drove off. Took everything. Wallet, phone, even my damn dignity. Tom gave a slow nod like that didn't surprise him one bit. "People do that to you," he said. "Especially the ones who say they love you." I didn't answer. I couldn't. My throat was tight, like a knot pulled too hard and refusing to loosen. All I could do was stare down at my hands, clenched in my lap, nails biting into my skin like maybe pain would somehow keep me grounded. That drive was maybe an hour, maybe two. I lost track. Time didn't feel real anymore. It was just motion. Forward. Away. Tom finally pulled off near a cracked old road sign, pointing toward Grand Junction. A few rundown buildings dotted the distance, and I could make out a blinking red traffic light up ahead. Civilization, or at least the ghost of it. He brought the truck to a stop near a dusty crossroad and looked at me with those weathered eyes. "This is as far as I'm headed," he said. "You'll find a shelter a few blocks down that way. White building with a cross on the side. Tell him Tom sent you, if it helps." I nodded, throat dry. "Thanks," I croaked, reaching for the door handle. "Hey," he said before I could get out. "Don't go back. Whatever she did, she'll do it again." I froze, meeting his gaze. There was something behind his words, something lived. A shadow of his own story, buried under miles of highway and diesel fumes. "I wasn't planning to," I said quietly, then stepped out. The truck rumbled off, kicking up dust behind it, and I stood there watching the taillights vanish into the haze. When they were gone, I looked down at my feet. My shoes were stained and scuffed. My shirt stuck to my skin. I was broke, hungry, and homeless. But I wasn't afraid. Not anymore. Every step I took toward that town felt like I was shedding something. Layers of humiliation, of pretending everything was fine. I thought about Rachel, about the way she used to laugh with me, not at me. That Rachel had disappeared a long time ago, replaced by someone who found amusement in tearing me down in front of her friends. They'd been building to this. Megan's constant jabs, Brooke's smug little comments, Ivy's sideways glances and whispered jokes. And Rachel? She didn't just allow it. She thrived in it. Like she got a thrill out of watching me squirm, out of seeing how much I'd take before I snapped. But I hadn't snapped. I'd stayed. That was my mistake. I reached the edge of town as the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows over the pavement. My legs ached. My throat was a desert. And still I walked. I passed shuttered stores, a worn-out bar with a neon sign that sputtered half-lit letters, and a pawn shop with barred windows. Finally, I spotted it, the shelter. Just like Tom said. A plain white building with a cross painted on the side and a crooked ramp leading to the front door. Part of me wanted to turn around, to keep walking, to disappear completely. But another part, stronger, told me I'd already disappeared long enough. I stepped inside. The place smelled like bleach and old coffee. A man behind the front desk looked up. Late 50s. Shaved head. Sharp eyes that didn't miss a thing. His name tag read Frank. "You lost or just broke?" he asked without missing a beat. "Both," I replied, rubbing the back of my neck. Frank didn't blink. Just handed me a clipboard. "Fill this out. We'll get you a bed for the night. Tomorrow, we figure out the rest." I took the pen, and for the first time in years, felt like I had a choice. That night, I lay on a thin cot in a room full of strangers, the sound of snores and coughing filling the space. I stared at the ceiling, Rachel's face flashing through my mind, laughing, dismissing me, turning away as they drove off. I wanted to hate her. But mostly, I just felt empty. Still, as I closed my eyes and let the noise fade into the background, one thought stayed clear. I was done being their joke, done being the man left behind. And whatever came next, it was going to be mine. The morning came too soon. I woke up in that shelter cot with a stiff neck, a dry mouth, and the sour smell of unwashed socks lingering in the air. Around me, a dozen other men stirred, some groaning, some coughing, some already out the door. It wasn't peaceful, but it was shelter. And for now, that was enough. Frank found me sitting on the edge of the cot, staring at the scuffed floor like it held the answers to my life. He handed me a paper cup filled with weak coffee and sat beside me on a folding chair. "You need ID," he said bluntly. "Can't do much without it. Takes time to get a replacement, but we'll start the process." I nodded, too tired to ask questions. "And in the meantime," he continued, "you need money. Food, basics. There's a diner 2 blocks down, place called Debbie's. Owner's a hard ass, but she's always short-staffed. Go ask. Tell her I sent you." I didn't have options, only directions. I thanked him, slipped on my battered shoes, and started walking. The diner sat on the corner of a quiet street, a squat little building with peeling red paint and a flickering, open sign. Through the window, I saw cracked vinyl booths, an old jukebox in the corner, and a woman behind the counter who looked like she hadn't taken crap from anyone in decades. That was Debbie. I pushed the door open, and the bell above it gave a tired chime. She glanced up, eyes sharp under her graying hair, tattoos winding up both arms like battle scars. "Frank said you're hiring," I said. She didn't look impressed. "He also say I'm not running a charity?" "No, ma'am," I replied. "I'll work. Hard. I just need a shot." She narrowed her eyes, wiped her hands on a rag, and tossed me a faded apron. "Dishwasher quit yesterday. Pays crap. Hours are worse. You steal, you're dead. Start now." I didn't blink. "Yes, ma'am." The kitchen was hot, loud, and smelled like a mix of grease, soap, and burnt toast. I found the dish pit in the back, piles of plates crusted with eggs, ketchup, and God knows what. The sink water was scalding, and within minutes, my hands were raw and red. But I didn't stop. Scrub, rinse, stack, repeat. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't fulfilling. But it was mine. No Rachel. No laughter at my expense. No smug jokes behind my back. Just me. And the work. By the end of the day, my back ached and my arms throbbed. Debbie didn't say much when I handed her the apron, just grunted and nodded. "Come back tomorrow. Same time. Don't be late." It was the closest thing to a compliment I'd had in years. Back at the shelter, Frank clapped a hand on my shoulder when I walked in. "You'll be all right," he said. I wanted to believe that. Each day after that blurred into the next. Mornings at the shelter, afternoons at the diner. I kept my head down, worked hard, and tried not to think about Rachel. But at night, lying on that cot in the dim glow of the shelter hallway, her voice still crept in. "Lighten up, Alex. God, you're so sensitive." Her laughter. Their laughter. The sound of the car engine fading as they drove away. I hated that I still missed her. That part of me still wondered if she regretted it. If she'd thought about turning around. But I knew better. If regret came at all, it wouldn't be for me. It would be for the image, the inconvenience, the fallout. She didn't leave me in a moment of passion. She planned it. They all did. Like I was a problem to be solved with a joke. A week into my new life, Frank helped me fill out the paperwork for a new ID. I had no address, no bank account, no phone. But we started the process anyway. It was slow, messy, and frustrating, but it was something. Debbie's diner became my lifeline. She never smiled, never coddled. But she noticed when I hustled, when I stayed late without being asked, when I cleaned the fryer even though it wasn't my job. "You ain't completely useless," she muttered one night, tossing me a soda as I clocked out. It was the closest thing to affection I'd felt since before my marriage. By the end of that second week, I'd saved just enough for a prepaid phone from the gas station. Holding it in my hand, fresh out of the box, I felt a flicker of pride. It wasn't much, but it was mine. That night, as I lay in the shelter, the phone buzzed in my pocket. My stomach dropped when I saw the name on the screen. Rachel. The first ring, I stared. The second, my hands trembled. By the third, I let it go to voicemail. Then the message came through. I shouldn't have listened, but I did. "Alex, where are you? We waited for you. It was just a joke. We're so worried. Please call me back." My blood ran cold. She waited for me. No. They laughed. They vanished. They left me with nothing. Another buzz. This time, Megan. Come on, dude. You have to admit it was hilarious. Call us back. That was it. That was what I meant to them. A punchline. I stared at the phone as the screen lit up again. And again. And again. Rachel. Brooke. Ivy. All trying to drag me back into the hell I'd just started crawling out of. I didn't answer. Not this time. I put the phone down, closed my eyes, and let the noise fade. They didn't get to decide my story anymore. I didn't sleep that night. The shelter was quiet, just the low hum of the heater and the occasional cough from the next cot. But inside my head, it was chaos. Rachel's voice from the voicemail kept echoing, bouncing off the walls of my mind like a ghost that refused to fade. We waited for you. It was just a joke. Please call me back. A joke. That's what she called it. Leaving me in the middle of nowhere with no phone, no money, no way to get home. That was a joke to her. To them. I could picture it so clearly. Megan probably doubled over with laughter. Brooke leaning back in the seat, tossing her hair like some bored queen. Ivy, the quiet instigator, smirking while she filmed the whole thing for their group chat. And Rachel, my wife, sitting in the driver's seat, smiling, satisfied. I was never meant to be a husband to her. I was entertainment. A prop. By sunrise, my mind was made up. I got up, got dressed, and went back to work like nothing happened. But something inside me had shifted. There was steel in my spine now, and every plate I scrubbed, every greasy pan I scoured, felt like a step away from who I used to be. At the end of my shift, I walked to the alley behind Debbie's diner and lit a cigarette a guy at the shelter had given me. I didn't even smoke, but I needed something to do with my hands. The phone buzzed in my pocket again. Another voicemail. Rachel. I didn't check it. Didn't need to. I already knew what it would say. That she was sorry. That it had gone too far. That she missed me. Or worse, that I was overreacting. That I always took things too seriously. My hands trembled with rage. I took out the phone and opened the voicemail tab. One by one, I played them. Rachel's breathy apologies. Brooke's fake concern. Megan's smug giggles. Seriously, Alex, grow a pair. You act like we left you in the desert. It was just a few hours. Lighten up. I clenched the phone so tight, I thought the screen would crack. They weren't sorry. Not really. They missed their punchline. I scrolled to the contact list. Rachel, Megan, Brooke, Ivy. One by one, I blocked them. My fingers shook as I did it. But when the last name disappeared from my screen, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Silence. Peaceful, unfamiliar silence. Back in the shelter, I sat on the edge of my cot, staring at the phone like it might come alive and scream at me for daring to take control. But it stayed dark and still. Frank walked by, saw the look on my face, and stopped. You okay? He asked. I nodded. Yeah, actually, yeah. I think I am. He gave a rare smile, just a twitch of the corner of his mouth, then walked on. Over the next few days, I threw myself into the work. Debbie noticed. She barked less and grunted more, which I took as praise. I started helping out with prep work when the kitchen got backed up, chopping onions, scrubbing cutting boards, filling in wherever they needed an extra set of hands. The diner became my anchor. The clatter of dishes, the hiss of the grill, Debbie's gravel voice shouting orders, it all kept me grounded. Every night, I returned to the shelter with sore arms, raw hands, and just enough cash tucked into an envelope under my cot to make me feel like I was worth something. Rachel's name never showed up on my phone again. Not since I blocked her. But I knew she hadn't given up. I could feel it, like a shadow always waiting at the edge of the light. And I was right. 1 week later, as I was wiping down the counters near closing, Frank came in holding a letter. No return address, he said, handing it to me. But I figure you'll know who it's from. The handwriting was familiar. Too familiar. I didn't open it. Just stared at the envelope in my hands, my stomach twisting. I didn't need to read it. I'd already heard everything she had to say. Instead, I walked outside and dropped the letter into the dumpster behind the diner. It landed with a dull thud. That sound, paper on trash, might have been the most satisfying thing I'd heard all week. I stood there for a long moment, breathing in the cold night air, the wind tugging at my clothes. Rachel was gone, and I was still here, still standing, still rebuilding, still choosing, every single day, not to look back. That was the real revenge. Not screaming, not fighting, just silence, and a man she could no longer reach. Life settled into a rhythm. Not a perfect one, Nothing about living in a shelter and scrubbing crusted pans in a suffocating kitchen was perfect, but it was mine. I knew what to expect. Wake up before sunrise, choke down bitter coffee, clock in at Debbie's, work until my fingers ached, then crash back onto the cot with a paper-thin blanket and a sore back. I wasn't happy, not yet, but I was grounded, stable, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like a joke. Then she walked in. It was a Tuesday. The diner was dead, mid-afternoon lull between lunch and dinner. I was wiping down the front counter when the bell above the door jingled. She stepped in, a worn messenger bag slung over her shoulder, dark hair pulled into a messy bun, and textbooks clutched to her chest like armor. She chose the booth by the window, the one everyone avoided because the sunlight hit just right and cooked you alive during the summer. But she didn't seem to notice. She slid into the seat, pulled out a notebook, and immediately started writing, lips moving silently, as if she was rehearsing lines only she could hear. Debbie glanced at her, then at me. "Your problem now," she muttered and disappeared into the back. I approached her table, wiping my hands on a rag. "Welcome to Debbie's. What can I get you?" She didn't look up, just said, "Denver omelet, no tomatoes. Extra coffee. And do you have oat milk?" "Nope. We have milk. From a cow." She finally looked at me then, just for a second. Her eyes were sharp, focused. She didn't smile, didn't laugh, just nodded. "Regular milk, then?" I brought her coffee and watched her scribble in her notebook while muttering things like acetylcholine and medulla oblongata. Med student, I guessed. Probably studying nearby. She didn't say much, didn't stay long. But she came back 2 days later. Then again the day after that. Always the same booth. Same order. Same 1,000-yard stare into her notes. Something about her fascinated me. Maybe it was how focused she was. How unbothered. How she didn't treat me like I was invisible, or worse, like I was a servant. She didn't ask about my past. Didn't joke at my expense. She didn't look through me. So, I started messing with her. Little things at first. Swapping out my name tag for fake names, Bob, Steve, Carl. One day, I wore a tag that said Rusty, and when I brought her food, she finally raised an eyebrow. "Your name tag is wrong," she said. "Is it?" I replied, smirking. She gave the faintest of smirks. "You don't look like a Rusty." That was it. Our first real moment. A spark. Her name was Emma. She didn't tell me right away, but I learned it from the receipt she left behind once. It suited her, simple, no nonsense, honest. After that, I started lingering by her table just a little longer. Refilled her coffee even when she didn't ask. Slipped her an extra hash brown when she looked especially exhausted. She started noticing. Said thanks. Smiled once, briefly, but it stayed in my head all night. One Friday evening, she came in dressed nicer than usual. Jeans, a clean blouse, makeup done like she'd been preparing for something. I asked if she was celebrating. "My friends bailed on dinner plans," she said, sliding into her usual booth. "I'm not wasting the reservation." Then she looked at me. Really looked. "You free?" I blinked. "You mean to join you?" Emma shrugged. "Unless you have another Friday night date with a stack of dishes." I didn't. Debbie overheard and barked from the kitchen. "Go on, lover boy. You're no use to me mooning around here all night." So we went. A quiet pizza place on the edge of town. Nothing fancy, but it might as well have been a 5-star restaurant to me. We talked for hours, about school, work, her insane study schedule, my tragic attempts at cooking. When I told her about the name tag game, she laughed. Really laughed. "I knew you weren't Rusty," she said, sipping her soda. "You're more of a Mike." I winced. "Alex, actually." She nodded. "Even better. We didn't kiss that night. We didn't need to. It wasn't that kind of connection, not rushed, not messy. It was slow, safe, real." A few weeks later, she started showing up just to see me, even when she wasn't studying. Brought me snacks during my break. Talked about wanting to move out of her shared apartment. I told her about the cot I slept on at the shelter and how I'd saved up just enough for something a little better. Then came the day she asked, "Want a roommate?" That was it. We moved into a cramped studio above the laundromat. The place was barely big enough for one person, let alone two. The hot plate sparked if you turned it the wrong way. The mattress was secondhand and smelled faintly of old takeout. Her textbooks were everywhere, but it was ours. She didn't ask about Rachel. I didn't bring it up. Emma didn't need to know everything to understand who I was. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I had to explain myself to be worth loving. I was just Alex. And for once, that was enough. The studio above the laundromat was small, ridiculously small, but we made it work. Emma's textbooks took up most of the space, scattered across every flat surface. The hot plate barely heated anything, and the bathroom was so tight I could brush my teeth and flush the toilet at the same time. But it was ours. No shelters, no cots, no snores from strangers on the other side of the room. Just two people figuring it out together. I'd wake up to the scent of laundry detergent drifting up through the floorboards, and Emma's soft breathing next to me. I was still poor, still rebuilding, still healing, but I wasn't alone. Work at the diner became more than just a job. It became the one place where I didn't feel like a shadow of who I used to be. Debbie started relying on me more. I wasn't just scrubbing dishes anymore. I was helping prep, running the kitchen when the short-order cook called out sick, training new hires when they shuffled in, wide-eyed and clueless. One rainy Wednesday, after a lunch rush that nearly broke me, Debbie pulled me aside while I was refilling the ketchup bottles. "You're not half bad," she muttered, lighting a cigarette she never actually smoked. "I've seen worse." That was her version of a compliment. I grinned. "Thanks, I guess." She squinted at me, then said, "I'm opening a second location. Smaller joint. Other side of town. Need someone to run it." I blinked, unsure if I heard her right. "You mean me?" "No, the ghost behind you," she snapped. "Yes, you." I stood there, ketchup bottle in hand, trying to process it. Me, running a diner. After everything. After being abandoned, humiliated, left with nothing but the shirt on my back. Now I was being offered a chance to lead? I wanted to say yes. God, I wanted to. But fear crept in like it always did. That whisper in the back of my head, "You're not good enough. You're the guy who got left behind at a gas station. The joke. The loser." I didn't answer right away. I told Debbie I needed to think about it. She just shrugged and walked off like it didn't matter either way, but I knew better. Debbie didn't offer second chances often. That night, Emma found me staring blankly at the ceiling, a half-cooked pot of macaroni going cold on the counter. "You okay?" she asked, setting her bag down. I told her about the offer, every word cautious, like saying it out loud might jinx it. When I finished, she didn't hesitate. "You're doing it," she said firmly, walking over and standing in front of me. "You already run that place most days. Debbie's just making it official." I hesitated. What if I screw it up? Emma knelt in front of me and took my hands. "Then you learn. But you won't. You've come too far, Alex. You built yourself back from nothing. Don't let fear talk you out of your future." That hit harder than I expected. Because she was right. I wasn't the man who'd been laughed at in the passenger seat. I wasn't the guy stranded on cracked asphalt begging for a ride. I was the man who'd crawled through humiliation, clawed through pain, and found something solid on the other side. I kissed her forehead. "Okay," I whispered. "I'll do it." The next morning, I told Debbie yes. She didn't smile. She just tossed me a set of keys and said, "Don't burn it down." The new diner was a hole in the wall. 10 tables, 1 counter, a kitchen barely bigger than our studio apartment. The walls needed paint, the fryer hissed like a snake, and the cooler smelled like sour onions. But it was mine. I spent the first few weeks fumbling through chaos, scheduling shifts, ordering supplies, training staff, fixing a fryer that shorted every time someone slammed the freezer door. I burned fries, forgot orders, snapped at a waitress when I shouldn't have. But I figured it out, because I'd already survived worse. And slowly, the place began to hum. Regulars trickled in. Locals who liked their eggs over medium and their coffee strong. Debbie popped in once or twice, grunted in approval, then disappeared again. That was all the praise I needed. And through it all, Emma was there, studying late, falling asleep on the couch with a textbook on her chest, waking up early to pack me breakfast when she could. She never asked for more, never doubted me, just stood beside me like a lighthouse in the storm. Then, one day it happened. I was behind the counter during a lull, going through receipts, when I saw it. An email. From Rachel. The subject line read, "Just checking in." My chest tightened. My finger hovered over the screen. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. She didn't get to intrude on this life I'd built. Not after what she'd done. I deleted it without a second thought and got back to work, flipping burgers, training staff, managing inventory. This diner was messy, noisy, and chaotic, but it was mine. And for the first time in my life, I felt like I was exactly where I was meant to be. 3 days after Rachel's name crept back into my inbox, she walked into my diner. She didn't come alone. The morning rush had just ended. The last of the regulars, Joe the trucker and old Miss Florence, were nursing their second cups of coffee. I was behind the counter restocking the napkin dispensers when the bell over the door jingled. I looked up, and time froze. Rachel, Megan, Brooke. 15 years. 15 years since they left me at that gas station in the middle of nowhere. And now here they were. Older, thinner, dressed too nice for this side of town, but unmistakably them. Rachel's hair was shorter now, cut in a tight bob. Her expression flickered the second she saw me. Shock, maybe guilt, but also something else, desperation. Megan still had that smug, effortless confidence that made you want to punch a wall. Brooke looked smaller somehow, like she didn't want to be seen. My stomach turned. I could have ducked into the back, could have sent a waitress, could have walked out the back door and never looked back. But I didn't. I grabbed a fresh pot of coffee, not because I thought they needed a refill, but because I needed something to hold, and I walked toward their booth. Rachel's eyes locked on mine. "Oh my God," she breathed. "It's you." Megan leaned back, smirking like this was all a fun surprise. "Look at you, big shot. Owns a whole diner now." I didn't smile. Didn't blink. "What do you want?" Rachel's fingers twisted around her napkin. We need to talk." I didn't sit. I didn't soften. "Then talk." She glanced at Megan, then back at me. Her voice cracked. "My business failed. The guy I married after you left, he left me. I'm broke." Megan lost her job. "Brooke, I'm not here for pity," I cut in coldly. "Why are you here?" Rachel swallowed hard. We need help. Money. Just to get back on our feet." We didn't know where else to go. Megan chimed in, all nonchalant. "Thought maybe you could help out. For old time's sake." Brooke nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "Just a little. Anything." I stood there, staring at the three of them, memories slamming into me like a freight train, their laughter, the car speeding off, the pit in my stomach as I stood alone in that gas station parking lot with nothing. They thought I would just hand it over. That after everything, I'd smile and play savior. I turned without a word and walked into the office. My hands were shaking. I could have thrown them out, could have screamed, could have made a scene in front of the whole diner. But I didn't want loud. I wanted final. I pulled open the drawer, grabbed my checkbook, and wrote the amount from memory. $73.50. The exact cost of a Greyhound ticket from Grand Junction to home. The price I would have paid if I'd given up that day. If I'd gone back to them. I walked back to their table and dropped the envelope in front of Rachel. She opened it slowly, her breath catching when she saw the number. Her eyes darted up, confused. "What is this?" I leaned in, voice low, steady. "That's what it would have cost me to get back to you that day. I didn't. And now, you don't get more than that." Megan snorted. "You're a jerk, Alex. After everything." "After everything?" I snapped, eyes narrowing. "You left me. You laughed. You made me feel like less than nothing. This," I tapped the envelope. "This is me being generous." Rachel's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Brooke was already shrinking into her seat, avoiding my eyes. I straightened. "It's time to leave. Don't come back." The diner had gone quiet. A couple of the regulars were staring, forks halfway to their mouths. I didn't care. Let them watch. Let them hear. Rachel shoved the envelope into her purse. Megan muttered something under her breath. Brooke looked like she might cry. They stood, walked out, and the bell above the door jingled one last time. I stood behind the counter, poured myself a cup of coffee with hands that didn't shake anymore, and watched them through the window. They were arguing in the parking lot. Megan waving her arms, Rachel looking down at the ground, Brooke glancing back toward the diner, then away. I felt nothing. No anger. No pain. No regret. Just peace. I'd given them what they gave me, enough to walk away. And now they were the ones left behind. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with Emma, the kids already in bed, the house quiet. She was grading papers. I was still thinking about the moment Rachel opened that envelope. "They came by," I said finally. Emma looked up. "Who?" "Rachel. Megan. Brooke. They asked for money." Emma didn't flinch. "What did you do?" "Gave them bus fare. Told them to leave." She smiled faintly, then reached out and squeezed my hand. "They can't take anything from you that you don't give them." And just like that, the last piece of weight lifted off my chest. She was right. They had nothing left to take. Weeks passed after Rachel, Megan, and Brooke walked out of my diner for the last time. Not a call, not an email, not even a trace of their names in my spam folder. Just silence. And it was beautiful. I stood in the kitchen one evening, stirring a pot of chili while Emma sat at the table grading essays. The kids were in the backyard, chasing each other through a maze of fallen leaves and half-raked grass. The sunlight poured through the window, golden and warm, painting everything like some Norman Rockwell postcard. I'd stopped looking over my shoulder, stopped expecting another knock at the door. Rachel and her ghosts had finally drifted far enough away that their voices no longer echoed in my head. This was my life now. My wife humming softly while working, our daughter yelling about a squirrel in the tree, our son trying to catch it with a butterfly net, the smell of cumin and garlic thick in the air. I tasted the chili, needed more heat, tossed in a pinch of cayenne and stirred. Emma looked up and smiled. "Smells good. Better be," I said, grinning. "It's got a 5-star Yelp rating from our 6-year-old. She laughed. Not forced or polite, real and easy. The kind of laugh Rachel never gave me unless it was at my expense. Dinner was chaos. The kids bickered over who got more cornbread. Emma rolled her eyes, playfully threatened to ban dessert for the week, and I just sat there, watching, absorbing. This, all of this, it was mine. Later that night, after the kids were asleep and the dishes were done, I stepped out onto the porch with a cold beer in hand. The fall air was crisp, the sky scattered with stars, the quiet humming with distant crickets and the occasional bark from a neighbor's dog. Emma joined me a few minutes later, wrapped in a blanket, her hair still damp from a quick shower. She sat beside me, leaning her head on my shoulder. "What's on your mind?" she asked. I stared at the sky. Nothing. Then I smiled. Everything. Because for once, those two things didn't feel like opposites. I thought about where I'd started. About that gas station. That empty parking lot. The way I'd felt so small, so disposable. I thought about sleeping on a cot in a room full of strangers. About washing dishes until my fingers cracked. About Frank's gruff kindness, Debbie's tough love, Emma's quiet, unwavering belief in me. I didn't need revenge. Not really. Rachel had wanted to break me. Or maybe she didn't care one way or the other, but the result was the same. She left me in a place she didn't think I could climb out of. But I did. And I didn't climb out to spite her. I climbed out because I deserved better. Because I was better. The next morning, I unlocked the doors to my third diner, the newest one, tucked just outside of town. The breakfast rush hit hard. Truckers barking for coffee, the fryer spitting oil like it was angry at the eggs, my waitresses flying between tables. The usual chaos. And in the middle of it, my phone buzzed. I ignored it. Too busy. Later, during a lull, I checked the notification. LinkedIn. Someone viewed your profile 27 times today. I frowned. I didn't use LinkedIn much. Just a basic page with my name and the diners. The photo Emma had taken of me outside Debbie's, grease-stained apron and all. I tapped into the views. Rachel. My breath caught. For a second. Just a second. Her profile was polished. Corporate. Fake smile. Consultant for some firm I didn't recognize. 27 views. In one day? She'd been digging. Watching. I stood in the stockroom, phone in hand, surrounded by shelves of pancake mix and canned beans. My heart pounded, not from fear, but fury. She couldn't just let go. She hadn't said anything, hadn't messaged. But that made it worse, somehow. She was lurking, peeking in through the digital windows of a life she'd thrown away like trash. Part of me wanted to message her, ask her what the hell she wanted, ask her if her curiosity came from guilt or jealousy. But I didn't. I wouldn't give her that. Instead, I went back to the grill and flipped an omelet for a regular who always ordered extra bacon. I filled coffee mugs. I cracked jokes with the staff. I looked out at the tables filled with people who saw me as something more than a joke. That night, I came home, and Emma didn't even have to ask. She could see it on my face. "Her," she said quietly. I nodded. She viewed my profile. A lot. Emma didn't flinch. And I exhaled. And nothing. She smiled, proud and calm. Exactly. We sat on the couch, our kids asleep upstairs, the sound of cartoons long faded into quiet. I wrapped an arm around her and closed my eyes. Rachel could watch all she wanted. She could replay my life from a distance. But she didn't get to live in it. She was gone. And I was here. Husband. Father. Business owner. Survivor. The man she left behind? He didn't exist anymore. And the life she tried to destroy? I'd rebuilt it, brick by brick, dish by dish, laugh by laugh. That was the best revenge. Living so well. She couldn't touch me even if she tried. Looking back now, I see it all more clearly. Life has a brutal way of teaching us what we refuse to learn gently. I spent years ignoring red flags, laughing off cruelty, shrinking myself to keep others comfortable. But when they left me behind, literally and emotionally, they gave me the greatest gift, the chance to start over. If there's anything I've learned, it's this. Your worth isn't measured by how much you endure for the wrong people. Love doesn't mock. Loyalty doesn't abandon. And real strength doesn't come from holding it all together. It comes from walking away when you've been broken one too many times and choosing to rebuild anyway. To anyone listening, especially those older, who've spent decades giving and sacrificing, don't let the years behind you convince you that it's too late to find peace or start fresh. You're not too old to be respected. You're not too tired to be loved the right way. If someone's treating you like a burden, they don't belong in your future. Let them go. Heal. Grow. And above all, live a life so rich, so honest, so your own, that anyone who once underestimated you can only watch from the outside, wondering how they ever let you go.